billionaire's necklace vanishes. They blame the maid, destroying her life in public. But their perfect frame job had one tiny flaw. They didn't know someone was watching. Before we find out who it was, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you're ready to see justice served, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. You don't want to miss this. For 10 years, Elena had been the housekeeper. It was a simple title for a role that had become infinitely complex. She was the silent witness to the family's frigid dinners, the keeper of secrets whispered in passing, and the one person who knew that the scent of lemon polish could never truly mask the odor of loneliness that permeated the grand estate. Her movements were economical and graceful, honed by a decade of navigating the silent currents of the Caldwell's world. She was 45, with laugh lines etched around kind, dark eyes and hands that were rarely still, always mending, cleaning, or comforting. Her first duty of the day was her most cherished. She pushed open the heavy oak door to Liam's room, a space that, unlike the rest of the house, was filled with a child's vibrant chaos. Spaceship models hung from the ceiling and drawings were taped to the walls, a riot of color against the heritage blue wallpaper. In the center of the room, buried under a duvet, was the 8-year-old heir to the Caldwell fortune, Liam. "Time to launch the mission, my little astronaut," Elena whispered, her voice a warm melody in the quiet room. A small head of unruly blonde hair emerged from the covers. "5 more minutes, Commander Lena," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Elena smiled, pulling the curtains back to let the pale morning light spill in. "Negative, Captain. The galaxy awaits. And so do your blueberry pancakes. I made them with the secret ingredient." Liam's eyes shot open. "The chocolate chips?" he whispered conspiratorially. "The very same," she confirmed with a wink. "A secret between us. Your grandmother believes chocolate before noon is a sign of societal decay." That earned her a genuine giggle, a sound that seemed to chase the shadows from the corners of the room. This was their world, a small pocket of warmth carved out of the vast, cold emptiness of the estate. Elena was more than a housekeeper to Liam. She was his anchor. His own mother, a woman he only knew from a single sad-eyed portrait in the West Wing, had passed away when he was just a toddler. Since then, Elena had been the one to check for monsters under his bed, to applaud his lopsided Lego creations, and to hug him with a ferocity that spoke of a love that was chosen, not obligated. She helped him dress, their hands moving in a familiar dance as she buttoned his shirt. "Remember what we practiced?" she quizzed him gently. He nodded, his small face serious. "When Grandma asks about my day, I say it was satisfactory. And I don't mention the frog we found in the fountain." "And your father?" "I ask him how the stock market is doing." Elena's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. It was a game they had to play, a script they had to follow to maintain the fragile peace. She straightened his collar, her touch lingering on his shoulder. "You're a good boy, Liam. Don't you ever forget that." The breakfast room was an exercise in silent tension. A long mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen, separated the 3 members of the Caldwell family like islands in a dark, glossy sea. At the head sat Eleanor Caldwell, the family matriarch. She was a woman carved from ice, her posture ramrod straight, her silver hair styled in an impeccable chignon. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing and approved of very little. She held the family's legacy in her iron grip, and her primary concern was the preservation of the Caldwell name above all else, including, it often seemed, the happiness of her own blood. On her right sat her son, Preston Caldwell IV. He was a man who wore his expensive suits like armor, his face a mask of detached indifference. He was handsome in a severe, joyless way, his attention perpetually fixed on the financial news scrolling across the tablet propped against a silver toast rack. He loved his son, Elena believed, but it was a distant, theoretical love. He didn't know how to bridge the gap between them, and over the years he had simply stopped trying, deferring all matters of the heart and of his son to his domineering mother. Elena served the pancakes, placing a plain, chipless stack in front of Liam under Eleanor's watchful gaze. Liam shot Elena a look, a tiny shared secret that sparked between them. Liam, Eleanor's voice was crisp, cutting through the silence. Your French tutor informed me that you were distracted yesterday. You were gazing out the window. Liam shrank a little in his chair. There was a hawk, Grandma. The only thing you should be focused on is your verb conjugations, she stated, not unkindly, but with an utter lack of warmth. A Caldwell must be disciplined. Your father learned that. Didn't you, Preston? Preston looked up from his tablet, his eyes momentarily unfocused as if returning from a great distance. Yes, Mother. Discipline is paramount. He offered no defense for his son, no gentle inquiry about the hawk. He simply nodded and returned to his digital world, the wall between him and his son growing infinitesimally thicker. Elena watched from the doorway, her heart aching for the small boy sitting so straight in his chair, trying to be the man they wanted him to be. She was the one who had seen the hawk with him, who had whispered about how its wings caught the wind. She was the keeper of his wonder, a treasure the other Caldwells saw no value in. Later that afternoon, Elena found Liam in the sprawling rose garden, a place of stark, geometric beauty. It was Eleanor's pride and joy, each bush pruned to within an inch of its life. Liam was on his knees by a small patch of earth near the old stone wall, a trowel in his hand. He looked up as she approached, his face smudged with dirt. I'm making a secret garden, he whispered. He held up a fistful of crumpled, wilted wildflowers. They're not as fancy as Grandma's roses, but I think they're prettier. Elena knelt beside him, the scent of damp earth a welcome relief from the sterile air of the house. They're beautiful, Liam, because you chose them. She helped him dig small holes, their hands working together in the soil. Lena, he said, his voice small, why doesn't Father ever come to the garden with me? Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. Your father is a very busy man. He carries a lot of weight. It's hard for him to put it down. You're busy too, Liam countered, his child's logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. But you're always here. Before she could answer, a shadow fell over them. Eleanor stood on the stone path above, her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold disapproval. She didn't look at Liam but at Elena. Her gaze was sharp, possessive, as if she were looking at a rival. Elena, she said, her voice dangerously soft. The silver in the dining room needs polishing. Now. There was no request, only a command layered with an unspoken warning. You are the help. Remember your place. He's my grandson. Yes, Mrs. Caldwell, Elena said, rising to her feet and dusting the dirt from her apron. She gave Liam's shoulder a gentle squeeze, a silent promise to return before walking away, feeling the matriarch's icy stare on her back the entire time. The day ended as it began, with a quiet ritual in Liam's room. After a dinner as silent and stilted as breakfast, Elena tucked him into bed. The book they were reading was a well-worn copy of Treasure Island, and Elena read with a quiet passion, her voice bringing pirates and high-seas adventures to life in the grand, lonely house. When she finished the chapter, Liam's eyes were heavy with sleep, but he fought to keep them open. Lena? Yes, my love? Will you stay until I'm asleep? It was a question he asked every night. I will stay until you are sailing on dream seas, my little captain, she promised, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. I'm not going anywhere. She sat in the armchair by his bed, the dim light from the hallway casting a warm glow around her. From this vantage point she could see the family portrait above the fireplace. It was of Liam, Preston, and Eleanor, all dressed in formal attire, their expressions stiff and posed. They looked less like a family and more like a collection of beautiful, expensive objects. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Elena looked up to see Preston standing in the doorway. He was watching them, his usual mask of indifference gone, replaced by something complicated and sad. He saw the easy affection between his son and his housekeeper, a warmth he himself was incapable of giving. For a fleeting second, his eyes met Elena's, and in them she saw a flicker of shame, of regret. He opened his mouth as if to speak, to perhaps come in and say his own good night, but the moment passed. The mask slipped back into place. He gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod and then turned, his footsteps echoing down the long, empty hall, leaving Elena alone once more to be the heart of a house that had none of its own. The calm of the following afternoon was a fragile illusion, shattered by a single sharp cry of outrage from the East Wing study. It was Eleanor's sanctuary, a room of dark wood, leather-bound books, and secrets locked away in mahogany cabinets. In the center of the room, built into the wall and concealed behind a portrait of her late husband, was the Caldwell Vault. It was a masterpiece of modern security, a biometric fingerprint scanner, a 16-digit keypad, and a reinforced steel door that hissed softly when it opened. It was considered impenetrable. Inside that vault, nestled in a custom-made velvet box, was supposed to be the crown jewel of the Caldwell collection, the Star of Astoria. It was a legendary diamond necklace, a cascade of impossibly clear stones with a centerpiece the size of a robin's egg. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a symbol of the family's power, a piece of their history that was as cold, brilliant, and unyielding as the matriarch herself. And now it was gone. Eleanor stood before the open, empty vault, her face a pale mask of fury. The empty velvet box lay open on her desk. Preston stood beside her, his usual composure fractured by a nervous energy. "It's impossible," he was saying, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "No one has the code. Only you and I have fingerprint access. There's been no alarm, no breach." "Don't be a fool, Preston." Eleanor's voice was low and serrated like grinding glass. "This wasn't a breach. This was a betrayal. There is only one other person who has the run of this house, who knows our schedules, who is close enough to see everything." She didn't need to say the name. Her eyes, burning with a cold fire, were already fixed on the doorway. Get her. Elena was in the laundry room, folding a small stack of Liam's t-shirts, the scent of fresh linen a small comfort in her day. She was humming a soft lullaby when Preston appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "My mother wants to see you in the study. Now." The request was unusual, his tone even more so. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach as she followed him through the silent halls. The atmosphere in the study was thick and suffocating. Eleanor was seated behind her grand desk, the picture of imperious judgment, the empty necklace box placed squarely in front of her like a piece of evidence. "Elena," Eleanor began, her voice deceptively calm. "You have been in our employ for 10 years. "Yes, Mrs. Caldwell," Elena answered, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "In that time you have been given a level of trust afforded to few. You move through our home, through our lives, with complete freedom." Elena's confusion mounted. "I have always been honored by your trust, ma'am." Eleanor's facade of calm cracked, replaced by a vicious sneer. She gestured sharply to the empty box. "Then you can explain this. The Star of Astoria is gone." The blood drained from Elena's face. She stared at the empty velvet indentation, then back at Eleanor's accusatory glare. "Gone? But how? I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do," Eleanor hissed, rising slowly from her chair. "You saw an opportunity. The devoted servant, worming her way into our family, into my grandson's affections. You watched, you waited, and you took what you believed you were owed." The accusation was so monstrous, so far from any conceivable reality, that Elena could only stammer. "No, Mrs. Caldwell, I would never. I swear to you." She turned her desperate gaze to Preston, who had been standing silently by the window, his back to the scene. "Preston, please. You know me. You know I would never do such a thing." This was the moment. The pivot upon which her life would turn. Preston slowly turned to face her, his expression torn. For a heart-stopping second, Elena saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a memory of a decade of her loyalty, of her genuine love for his son. But then he looked at his mother, at her unbending will, and the flicker was extinguished. His face hardened into the familiar mask of the weak man acquiescing to the strong. "The vault was open this morning, Elena," he said, his voice cold and distant, refusing to meet her eyes. "And you were the only other person on this floor. My mother is right. There is no other explanation." It was a dagger to the heart. A betrayal more painful than the accusation itself. He knew it was a lie, but he said it anyway. He was choosing his mother, his inheritance, his path of least resistance over the truth. "No," Elena whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "Preston, look at me. Look at me and tell me you believe this." He couldn't. He simply looked away towards the safety of his mother's cold certainty. Eleanor seized the moment of victory. She picked up the phone on her desk, her movements sharp and decisive. "I am calling the police," she announced, her eyes locked on Elena's, glittering with triumph. "I wondered how long it would take for your kind to show its true colors. It seems I have my answer." Elena stood frozen in the center of the opulent room, the walls closing in around her. 10 years of service, a decade of love and devotion, erased in less than 5 minutes by a lie. The trap had been sprung. As Eleanor's cool, clear voice spoke to the authorities, accusing her by name, Elena Garcia understood that her life was no longer her own. It had been stolen from her as surely as the star of Astoria itself. The wheels of Caldwell justice were swift and merciless. Before Elena could fully process the betrayal, 2 uniformed police officers were standing beside her in the study. She was read her rights in a detached monotone, the clinical words a stark contrast to the violent upheaval in her soul. They didn't use handcuffs, a small, calculated courtesy by the local police chief, who knew which family butters the town's bread, but the humiliation was no less profound. They led her not through a discreet side exit, but directly out the grand front doors of the estate. It was a deliberate act of theater orchestrated by Eleanor. As Elena stepped into the daylight, a blinding fusillade of camera flashes erupted from beyond the gates. A swarm of reporters, tipped off with surgical precision, surged forward, microphones and cameras thrust towards her like weapons. "Miss Garcia, did you act alone? How long were you planning to rob the family? What do you have to say to the little boy you betrayed?" The questions were a roar of condemnation, each one a stone cast at her. She flinched, trying to shield her face as the officers guided her into the back of a police car. Through the window she caught one last glimpse of the house, her home for a decade. In an upstairs window she saw a small curtain move. Liam. The thought that he was watching this, seeing her treated like a criminal, was a pain sharper than any steel cuff. The car pulled away, leaving the pristine estate behind, and Elena's descent into hell began. The story wasn't just news, it was a sensation. A perfect tabloid narrative of working-class greed versus old money trust. The Caldwells, masters of public relations, released a single devastating statement. It spoke of their profound sense of betrayal and their deep concern for the well-being of our son, who has been forced to endure a second terrible loss. They were the victims, a grieving family preyed upon by the woman they had welcomed into their home. The narrative was set in stone. Elena's face was everywhere. A grainy, unflattering photo from the perp walk was plastered on the cover of the New York Post under the headline, "The Greenwich Grabber." Another tabloid dubbed her the maid who stole millions. A cable news channel ran a special segment, a slickly produced package of speculation and moral outrage. A body language expert analyzed footage of Elena, claiming to see clear signs of duplicity. A former Society columnist spoke with authority about the dangers of letting the help get too close. The voice of a news anchor narrated over B-roll footage of the Caldwell estate. Elena Garcia, 45, had worked for the reclusive Caldwell family for over a decade. To the outside world she was a trusted employee. But inside these walls, prosecutors alleged she was a cunning thief, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then came the digital onslaught, a tidal wave of anonymous cruelty. On Twitter, #CaldwellThief trended for 2 days. Unbelievable. She probably stole from that poor little boy too. Lock her up. My friend catered a party there once. Said the maid always looked shifty. Knew it. This is what you get for trusting people. The Caldwells are saints for not having her arrested sooner. After a harrowing 48 hours, Elena was released on bail, paid by a small, anonymous contribution from her local church, the only act of kindness she'd received. She found herself in a cramped, temporary apartment, the walls thin and the air stale. The silence was a physical presence, a stark contrast to the media noise that was destroying her life. The world was shouting about her, but she had no voice. A public defender had been assigned to her, an overworked young man who looked at her with a mixture of pity and resignation. He'd seen cases like this before, a nobody against a somebody. He advised her to plead guilty, to hope for a lighter sentence. She sat on the edge of a lumpy mattress, her one small bag of belongings on the floor. Her phone, which she'd foolishly turned on in a desperate search for a friendly voice, was a portal to hell. Endless notifications, hateful messages from strangers, and calls from reporters offering money for her side of the story. There was no side. There was only the Caldwell story and her silence. Her greatest fear wasn't prison. It was the image that haunted her waking moments and her sleepless nights. Liam, sitting in front of a television or a tablet, his innocent eyes watching a news report that painted his Lena as a villain. She could picture his confusion turning to doubt, his doubt hardening into belief. The thought of him believing she was a monster, that their love was a lie she had constructed to rob his family, was a torment worse than any jail cell. They weren't just taking her freedom, they were poisoning the purest thing in her life. She saw her reflection in the dark screen of her phone, a tired, frightened woman the world had already condemned. The public had their villain. The Caldwells had their narrative. And Elena Garcia, the heart of a heartless house, was left utterly and completely alone, with nothing but a truth that no one wanted to hear. The Superior Court of Connecticut was a temple of institutional power. Its ceilings were vaulted, its walls were paneled in dark, solemn wood, and its air was thick with the scent of old paper and gravitas. Sunlight struggled to pierce the tall, arched windows, casting long, judgmental shadows across the room. For Elena, sitting at the defense table, it felt less like a hall of justice and more like a tomb. The disparity was a physical presence. On one side, the prosecution, backed by the Caldwell's private legal team. There were a dozen of them, a phalanx of crisp suits and leather briefcases, moving with the silent, predatory efficiency of a wolf pack. They conferred in low, confident whispers, their every move oozing wealth and influence. On the other side was Elena and her public defender, Arthur Finch. He was a young man, barely 30, with a kind face, a rumpled suit, and a mountain of paperwork he was clearly struggling to manage alone. He was a goldfish swimming against a great white shark, and both of them knew it. The prosecutor, a formidable district attorney named Marcus Thorne, rose to give his opening statement. He was a master of courtroom theater, his voice resonating with moral certainty. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, pacing slowly before them, "this is not a simple case of theft. This is a case about a profound and calculated betrayal." He gestured towards Elena, not with anger, but with a kind of sorrowful disappointment. For 10 years, Elena Garcia was welcomed into the home of the Caldwell family. She was not just an employee, she was treated like family. She was entrusted with the most precious thing in that household, not the diamonds, not the jewels, but the well-being of a young boy, Liam Caldwell. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. And how did she repay that decade of kindness? That decade of trust? She used it as a weapon. She methodically groomed a lonely child, winning his affection to create a cloak of invisibility for herself. She learned the family's routines, their schedules, the location of their most prized possessions. And when the time was right, she struck. She stole the Star of Astoria, a priceless heirloom, yes, but more than that, she stole the sense of security from a child who had already lost his mother. This was not an act of desperation. This was an act of predation. Elena flinched as if he had struck her. Predator. The word was so ugly, so alien. She looked at her own hands resting on the smooth wood of the table. These were hands that had bandaged scraped knees, that had wiped away tears, that had held a small boy's hand while crossing the street. In Thorne's telling, they were the hands of a monster. The prosecution's case was a masterclass in narrative construction. They began with a security expert, a man with a string of credentials who testified that the Caldwell vault was, for all intents and purposes, impenetrable from the outside. No alarms were tripped, no locks were forced, he stated coolly, presenting complex schematics on a large screen. The system was bypassed using a known fingerprint and a known security code. This was an inside job, unequivocally. Arthur Finch's cross-examination was valiant but futile. Is it not possible for such a system to be hacked remotely? The expert gave a condescending smile. Possible in a Hollywood movie, perhaps. In reality, the encryption on this system is military grade. You'd have a better chance of guessing the lottery numbers 2 weeks in a row. The jury chuckled. The first brick in the wall against Elena was laid. Next came a forensic accountant who had dissected Elena's meager finances. He presented charts showing her small checking account, her modest credit card debt, her lack of any real savings. Thorne twisted her poverty into a powerful motive. So what we see here, Thorne said, guiding the witness, is a woman under significant financial pressure. A woman who, despite living in a world of unimaginable luxury, had nothing to her name. That is correct, the accountant agreed. On cross-examination, Arthur tried to push back. Isn't it also true that Miss Garcia never missed a bill payment? That her debt was minor and manageable for someone on her salary? Manageable, perhaps, the accountant conceded smoothly. But the data doesn't show desire. It doesn't show the temptation of living a life you can see but never touch. It was pure speculation, but it was effective. The jury saw a desperate woman, not a responsible one. The final and most devastating witness for the prosecution was Eleanor Caldwell herself. She took the stand looking the part of the dignified, heartbroken matriarch. She was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored black dress, a single strand of pearls around her neck. She spoke in a soft, controlled voice, her testimony a performance of quiet suffering. Thorne led her gently. Eleanor, could you describe the defendant's relationship with your grandson, Liam? Eleanor dabbed a single, perfect tear from her eye with a silk handkerchief. She was very close to him, she said, her voice catching slightly. I thought it was a blessing at first. After my daughter-in-law passed, Liam was so withdrawn. Elena brought him out of his shell. She was so kind, so attentive. I see now it was all a strategy. A strategy? Thorne prompted. To become indispensable. To become invisible, Eleanor clarified. To make us trust her so completely that we would never suspect her. Who would suspect the woman who reads your grandson his bedtime story? Who would suspect the woman he calls Lena? She delivered the name with a shudder of revulsion, twisting the term of endearment into something ugly and perverse. She didn't just steal a necklace. She tried to steal my grandson's heart to do it. The words hung in the air, damning and poisonous. Arthur Finch rose to cross-examine, but he was powerless. How could he question a grieving grandmother? How could he attack her testimony without looking like a bully? Mrs. Caldwell, he began weakly, isn't it possible you're misinterpreting a genuine bond of affection? Eleanor cut him off, her voice suddenly turning to steel. Affection? Was it affection that led her to my vault? Was it affection that has caused my grandson to have nightmares every night? Do not speak to me of affection, sir. I know what betrayal looks like. She looked directly at the jury, her eyes filled with a powerful, convincing sorrow. They looked back, their faces a mixture of sympathy for her and contempt for Elena. When Eleanor stepped down, the air in the courtroom had shifted. The case felt over. Marcus Thorne stood. "The prosecution rests, Your Honor." A heavy silence fell over the room. Elena sat paralyzed, the full weight of the Caldwell machine pressing down on her. She looked at Arthur, who could only offer a grim, defeated shake of his head. She looked at the jury, who refused to meet her gaze. The story had been told. The lie was perfect, seamless, and unbreakable. And as the judge called for a recess, Elena felt the last of her hope drain away, leaving only the cold, terrifying certainty of the guilty verdict to come. The walls had not just closed in. They had disappeared, replaced by a solid, impenetrable fortress of lies. The lie was perfect. Eleanor's manipulation was working, and an innocent woman was about to pay the price. It's a disgusting feeling, isn't it? If you can't stand toxic, controlling people like Eleanor, take 1 second to hit the like button as a vote for Elena. And in the comments below, type, "Truth wins" if you believe this injustice can't be the end of the story. Let's see how many of us there are. The judge, a stern man named Judge Harrington, looked down from his bench, his expression impassive but his eyes holding a hint of finality. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "does the defense wish to call its first witness?" Arthur Finch rose slowly, his shoulders slumped with the weight of inevitable defeat. He straightened his tie, a small, futile gesture of defiance. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment her empty, silent side of the story was officially recorded. "Your Honor," Arthur began, his voice barely a murmur, The defense has no witnesses to call at this time." A collective sigh seemed to pass through the jury box. It was over. The words were a death sentence. Elena closed her eyes, bracing for the final blow. The prosecutor, Marcus Thorne, was already gathering his notes for a closing argument that would be less a summation and more a victory lap. "Very well," Judge Harrington said, lifting his gavel. "Then we will proceed to—" "Your Honor, I object." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the funereal atmosphere of the courtroom with the sharp, clear ring of a silver bell. It came from the public gallery at the back. Heads turned. Jurors craned their necks. Judge Harrington paused, his gavel hovering in midair, his face a mask of stern annoyance at the breach of protocol. "Who speaks out of turn in my courtroom?" he demanded. A man stood up from the third row. He was of average height and build, with unassuming features and graying temples, dressed in a simple tweed jacket. Elena recognized him instantly, her mind reeling with confusion. It was Mr. Avery, Liam's private tutor. A quiet, bookish man who was always polite but blended into the background of the estate like the wallpaper. What could he possibly be doing? "My apologies for the interruption, Your Honor," Mr. Avery said, his voice calm and steady as he walked forward to the bar. "My name is Julian Avery. I have been serving as Liam Caldwell's academic tutor for the past 6 months." Thorne was on his feet. "Objection. This is highly irregular. Mr. Avery has no standing here." "On the contrary," Avery said, his gaze meeting Thorne's without a flicker of intimidation. "I have information and indeed evidence that is directly material to this case. Evidence the prosecution has either failed to uncover or chosen to ignore." A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. Eleanor Caldwell leaned forward, her eyes narrowed to slits, staring at the tutor as if seeing him for the first time. Who was this insignificant man and what game was he playing? "And who are you to make such a claim?" Judge Harrington asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Mr. Avery's unassuming demeanor seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet, steely confidence. "For 15 years prior to becoming a tutor, Your Honor, I was an investigative journalist for the Boston Globe. My specific field of expertise was exposing the financial and ethical corruption of powerful high society families." He let that statement hang in the air. "My career ended when one of those families retaliated with a lawsuit that bankrupted my paper and blacklisted me from every major publication in the country. I took the tutoring position at the Caldwell estate because I needed a job, yes. But I also took it because I've learned one thing. Where there is this much money and this much power, the truth is often the first casualty. The courtroom was utterly silent. Elena stared, dumbfounded. The quiet tutor who discussed history and mathematics with Liam was a disgraced bloodhound, a man who hunted secrets for a living. For 6 months, I have been a forgotten witness, Avery continued, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. I have observed this family. I have listened. And I have uncovered a pattern of coercion and control that provides a much clearer motive for this crime than the one the prosecution has so neatly fabricated. He turned to a stunned Arthur Finch. With the court's permission, I would like to offer my services as an investigative consultant to the defense. And as my first act, I would like to exercise their right to call a witness. Judge Harrington, intrigued despite himself, leaned forward. And who would you call, Mr. Avery? Avery's eyes scanned the room, passing over Eleanor's furious glare, and settled directly on the man sitting beside her. A man who had suddenly gone pale. The defense calls Preston Caldwell IV to the stand. A tremor of shock and confusion rippled through the courtroom. Calling Preston Caldwell, the son of the alleged victim and a man who had already corroborated his mother's story, seemed like an act of legal suicide. Prosecutor Thorne shot to his feet, his face a mask of outrage. Your Honor, the witness has already provided his testimony. The defense is clearly on a fishing expedition. On the contrary, Avery stated calmly, not even glancing at Thorne. The witness answered the prosecution's questions. Now he can answer mine. Judge Harrington, his curiosity piqued by Avery's dramatic entrance, overruled the objection with a sharp rap of his gavel. The witness will take the stand. Preston Caldwell walked to the witness box, his movements stiff and uncertain. He avoided looking at Elena, at Mr. Avery, at anyone but his mother. Eleanor gave him a short, sharp nod, a silent command, stick to the script. He sat down, adjusted his tie, and folded his hands, the picture of a man trying to project a confidence he did not feel. Elena watched him, her heart a tangled knot of emotions. This was the man who had condemned her with a lie, yet looking at him now, she saw not a monster, but a man trapped in a cage of his own making. Mr. Avery approached the stand, his demeanor more like a curious professor than a litigator. His first questions were deceptively simple, almost mundane. Mr. Caldwell, you are the CEO of Caldwell Industries, correct? Yes, in title, Preston answered. In title? Please explain. My mother, Preston said, shifting in his seat, remains the chairperson of the board. She maintains a significant role in all major decisions. Avery nodded, as if this were a perfectly normal arrangement. I see. And in your home life, would you say a similar dynamic exists? Thorne objected again. Relevance, Your Honor? I am establishing the witness's pattern of behavior and his role within the family power structure, Your Honor. It is directly relevant to his credibility, Avery countered smoothly. The judge waved a hand. I'll allow it for now, but get to the point, Mr. Avery. Avery continued, his questions weaving a subtle net. He asked about the choice of decor in the mansion, the hiring of staff, even the selection of Liam's private school. Preston's answers became a monotonous refrain. My mother oversaw that. That was my mother's decision. I deferred to my mother's judgment on the matter. With each answer, Preston seemed to shrink. Avery was not just questioning him. He was methodically dismantling his facade of authority, revealing the hollow man underneath. Preston was not the master of his house. He was a tenant, living under the absolute rule of his mother. Having established this pattern, Avery changed his line of questioning abruptly. Mr. Caldwell, let's talk about a business venture from last year. A real estate project called the Northwood Development. The reaction was immediate. Preston's carefully constructed composure fractured. A flicker of sheer panic flashed in his eyes before he could suppress it. He licked his lips, his gaze darting to his mother. Eleanor's face remained impassive, but her knuckles, gripping the armrest of her chair, had turned white. "I'm not familiar with that name," Preston said, his voice a little too tight. "Really?" Avery said, raising an eyebrow. He walked over to the defense table where Arthur Finch, now looking on with a sense of awe, handed him a file. "That's surprising, seeing as you personally guaranteed a $30 million loan for the project using Caldwell Industries stock as collateral. A loan that went into default." Thorne was on his feet again. "Objection. This has absolutely no bearing on the theft of a necklace. This is character assassination." "This has everything to do with the necklace, Your Honor," Avery shot back, his voice hardening for the first time. "This goes directly to motive. Not the defendant's motive, but the Caldwell family's." The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "I'm listening, Mr. Avery. Connect the dots for me." Avery pulled a document from the file and placed it on the projector. It was a loan agreement signed by Preston. The Northwood development was a disaster. A high-risk venture Preston entered into against his mother's advice. When it collapsed, it nearly exposed the company to catastrophic losses. It was a secret, wasn't it, Mr. Caldwell? A secret you desperately needed to keep from your board of directors and the public. Preston stared at his signature on the screen, sweating freely now under the courtroom lights. It was a minor business misstep. It was handled. "Oh, it was handled, all right," Avery agreed. He produced another document. A bank statement showing a $30 million transfer from a private account to the lender, settling the debt just days before it would have triggered a public notice of default. This transfer came from the personal account of one Eleanor DeWitt Caldwell. "Your mother," the courtroom murmured. This was no longer about a stolen necklace. It was a deep dive into the murky secrets of the Caldwell dynasty. "Your mother saved you, didn't she, Mr. Caldwell?" Avery pressed, his voice relentless, moving closer to the witness box. "She cleaned up your mess. But her help never comes for free, does it? There are always strings attached. She didn't just save your reputation, she acquired it. From that day forward, you were no longer her son and CEO. You were her asset. An investment she could control completely." "This is absurd," Preston stammered, looking pleadingly at his mother, but Eleanor offered no comfort, her face a mask of cold fury. She was furious not at Avery but at her son's weakness, at his inability to withstand the pressure. Avery leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every word was chillingly clear. "You were trapped. She held your catastrophic failure over your head like an executioner's axe. You would do anything she asked. You would sign any document. You would fire any employee. You would even stand by and watch as she destroyed an innocent woman who had shown your son more love than anyone else in his life." Preston was unraveling, shaking his head, muttering, "No, no." Avery stepped back and turned to face the jury, letting them see the broken man in the witness box. Then he turned back to Preston for the final, devastating blow. He let the silence stretch, the tension building until it was almost unbearable. When he spoke, his voice was not accusatory but calm and surgical, as if stating a simple, undeniable fact. "Isn't it true, Mr. Caldwell, that the theft of the Star of Astoria was a fiction, a play your mother wrote and directed? A convenient crisis to remove Elena Garcia, a woman whose bond with your son she could not control? And isn't it true that your role, the one she blackmailed you into playing with the secret of your $30 million failure, was simply to stand there, nod your head, and let an innocent woman take the fall?" The question hung in the electrified air. It was more than a question, it was the entire case flipped on its head. Thorne was speechless. The jurors leaned forward as one. Elena held her breath, tears welling in her eyes. It was the truth. The impossible, unspoken truth, finally dragged out into the light. Preston Caldwell stared at Avery, his face ashen, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He looked at his mother, whose icy composure had finally shattered into a look of pure venom. He was trapped between the truth that could set Elena free and the lie that would keep him enslaved forever. The entire courtroom waited for his answer. The silence in the courtroom was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Every eye was locked on Preston Caldwell, a man being publicly dissected by Mr. Avery's final, devastating question. He sat in the witness box, no longer a captain of industry but a cornered animal. His face was slick with sweat, his jaw working silently as he stared at the abyss Avery had opened before him. He looked from his mother's venomous glare to Mr. Avery's calm, waiting eyes, and then, for the first time, his gaze fell upon Elena. In his eyes she saw not malice but a deep, agonizing shame. The weight of the moment was too much. A choked sob escaped his lips, and he buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with the force of his collapse. It was this sound, the sound of his father's pain, that finally broke the spell. "Leave him alone." The voice was high-pitched, childish, and pierced the tension like a shard of glass. It came from the public gallery. A woman, a handler hired by Eleanor to keep Liam away from the proceedings, gasped as a small figure darted past her. Was Liam. His face was red, streaked with tears of anger and fear, but his eyes were blazing with a conviction that no one in the room could match. "Liam, no." Eleanor hissed, rising from her seat, her mask of control shattering into raw panic. Bailiffs moved to intercept him, but the boy was a blur of motion, fueled by a righteous fury. He scrambled under the bar separating the gallery from the court, his small shoes squeaking on the polished floor as he ran towards the center of the room, towards his broken father and the woman he loved. He didn't want to lie. Liam shouted, his voice ringing with a desperate clarity. "Grandma made him. She's the one who lied. She did it." Chaos erupted. Reporters in the back surged to their feet, cameras flashing. Judge Harrington slammed his gavel, the sharp crack barely audible over the din. "Order. Order in this court." But no one was listening. All attention was fixed on the small boy now standing in the space between the prosecution and the defense, a defiant David against a host of Goliaths. And in that moment, the central twist of Elena's story became blindingly clear. The son, who appeared to save her, wasn't a long-lost biological child or a brilliant lawyer arriving at the last minute. The son who had come to her rescue was the son of her heart, a little boy armed with nothing more than an unshakable love and a truth he could no longer bear to see buried. Mr. Avery stood perfectly still, a look of profound understanding on his face. He had cracked the facade, but it was Liam who was about to bring the entire fortress down. Liam pointed a trembling finger directly at his grandmother. "I saw her. I saw her hide the necklace. She's the one who did it." Judge Harrington's gavel came down with the force of a thunderclap, again and again, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos that had consumed his courtroom. "Order. I will have order," he boomed, his voice a physical force that finally silenced the shocked murmurs and the frantic clicking of cameras. "Bailiff, clear the gallery of all members of the press. Now. Everyone else, be seated or be held in contempt." The room scrambled to obey. Reporters, grumbling but intimidated, were ushered out, leaving a tense, charged silence in their wake. Eleanor Caldwell, her face a thunderous mask of fury, tried to move towards her grandson. "This is an outrage. He is a child. He is being manipulated." "You will be silent, Mrs. Caldwell, or you will be removed," the judge warned, his gaze like iron. He then looked down at the small boy standing alone in the vast, intimidating space. Liam was trembling, but he didn't back down. He stood his ground, his eyes fixed on Elena, his one true north in a world that had been turned upside down. The judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He beckoned Mr. Avery and Arthur Finch to the bench, along with a stunned Marcus Thorne. "What is this?" the judge demanded in a low, urgent whisper. "Is this a stunt?" "No, Your Honor," Avery said firmly. I had no idea the boy would do this. But he is here. And he has said he witnessed something. The foundation of the prosecution's case is now in question. We have a duty to hear him." Thorne, his case unraveling before his very eyes, sputtered, "He's a child. His testimony is unreliable, suggestible." "He seems quite sure of what he saw," the judge countered, his eyes still on Liam. He had presided over hundreds of cases and had learned to recognize the unmistakable ring of truth, even when it came from the most unexpected of sources. He made a decision. It was unorthodox, perhaps unprecedented, but in that moment he felt it was the only path to justice. He returned his attention to the courtroom. "In light of these extraordinary circumstances, I am going to allow a direct examination of the witness. Mr. Avery, given your established rapport with the child, you will conduct the questioning." Gently. Avery nodded and walked toward Liam, kneeling down so he was at the boy's eye level. He placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Liam," he said softly, his voice meant for him alone, but carrying through the silent room. "You know the difference between the truth and a lie, don't you?" Liam nodded, his eyes wide. "Telling the truth is when you say what really happened. A lie is when you try to make people believe something that didn't." "Exactly," Avery affirmed. "I just want you to tell us what really happened. Can you do that? Can you be brave for a little longer?" Liam took a deep breath and looked past Avery directly at Elena. He saw the tears streaming down her face, tears not of sadness but of overwhelming love. That look gave him all the strength he needed. He nodded. "I can." Avery led him not to the imposing witness stand, but to a simple chair brought to the center of the floor, allowing him to feel less intimidated. "Liam," Avery began, his voice gentle. "You shouted that you saw your grandmother with the necklace. Can you tell us about that day?" "It was last Tuesday," Liam began, his voice small but clear. The day they took Lena away. Earlier, Grandma had been mad at me. I left my toy soldiers on the floor of her study, and she said the room was for serious things, not for children's games. She told me not to go in there again." Preston flinched. He remembered that morning. He'd overheard his mother's sharp reprimand and had done nothing. "But I forgot one," Liam continued. "My favorite one, the captain. I thought he was missing in action. So I went back to the study to rescue him. The door was a little bit open. I was going to go in, but then I heard her coming, so I hid behind the big plant by the door because I didn't want to get in more trouble." Elena could picture it perfectly. The enormous potted fern by the study door, large enough to conceal a small, adventurous boy. "What did you see from behind the plant, Liam?" Avery asked. "I saw Grandma go to the wall," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "She pushed the painting of Grandpa and the secret door opened. The one for the vault." The jurors exchanged glances. This detail, this secret door, lent an immediate and powerful credibility to his story. "And then what happened?" "She took out the sparkly necklace," Liam said. "The star of Astoria. She was holding it. But she didn't look happy. She looked like she looks when the cook burns the toast. Angry." He paused, and his next words sent a chill through the courtroom. "She looked at the necklace and she talked to it." Eleanor, who had been sitting rigidly, let out a small, strangled gasp. "What did she say, Liam?" Avery prompted gently. Liam's voice trembled as he recalled the words, his memory sharp and unforgiving. "She said, 'You are nothing but a beautiful, expensive problem.' And then she looked towards the door and whispered, 'But you're the perfect way to solve our other, bigger problem.'" Thorne was on his feet. "Objection. This is fantasy. A child's imagination." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge commanded, his eyes riveted on Liam. "Let him finish." "What did she do then, Liam?" Avery asked. "She closed the vault," Liam said. "But she didn't put the necklace back. She walked over to the old music box. The big wooden one on the table by the window. At the mention of the music box, Preston made a sound, a low groan of dawning horror. It was an old family heirloom, a gift from his father to his mother decades ago. He knew it well. It was never used, just a decorative piece. A perfect hiding place. She opened the lid. Liam continued, his voice growing stronger as the memory became clearer. She put the necklace inside, under the little velvet part where the ballerina is. And then she said the last thing. He took a shaky breath, the memory clearly painful. She said, "He'll cry for a week and then he'll forget all about the help. She'll be gone for good." The words landed like a physical blow. The help. The callous, dismissive term she always used for Elena. The room was deathly quiet, the only sound the soft, ragged breathing of Elena as she openly wept. Eleanor finally snapped. The matriarch's iron control shattered into a million pieces. "He's lying," she shrieked, lunging to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "He is a child. He is confused. Elena put him up to this. That woman," she twisted his mind. Two bailiffs moved to restrain her as she tried to rush forward. "You ungrateful lying boy. After everything I have done for you. Mrs. Caldwell, you will be silent or I will have you gagged," the judge roared, his voice thundering through the chamber. But the damage was done. Her violent, desperate denial was more damning than any confession. In that moment, everyone in the room saw her for what she was. A cruel, manipulative woman whose reign of terror had just come to a spectacular end. Preston, who had been sitting like a statue, finally broke. He rose to his feet, his face ashen, his eyes filled with a terrible clarity. He looked at his son, whose small body was trembling with the aftermath of his bravery, and then at his mother, still struggling in the bailiff's grasp. The choice was finally horribly clear. "She's telling the truth," he said, his voice hoarse but firm, directed at the judge. "Liam is telling the truth. The music box. It's an antique from Switzerland. It sits on the credenza by the east window in her study." He spoke the words like a confession, each detail a nail in his mother's coffin and in his own. The prosecutor, Marcus Thorne, slowly sank into his chair, his face pale. His perfect case, his entire narrative, had been utterly annihilated by the simple, unshakable testimony of a child. Judge Harrington stared at the scene before him, at the brave, tearful boy, the broken father, the hysterical grandmother, and the weeping, vindicated woman at the defense table. He lifted his gavel, but this time he did not slam it. He held it, a symbol of the immense power that had just shifted in his courtroom. "This trial is hereby halted," he declared, his voice filled with a cold, righteous anger. "Based on the sworn testimony of this witness and the corroboration from Mr. Caldwell, I am issuing an immediate search warrant for the Caldwell estate, specifically for the contents of an antique music box located in the East Wing study. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell, you are to be detained as a material witness and are now under investigation for perjury and filing a false police report. Take her away." As the bailiffs led a screaming, protesting Eleanor from the courtroom, Elena's gaze met Liam's. There were no words left to say. In the ruins of the Caldwell dynasty's lies, a small boy had stood up, and with nothing but love and the truth, he had set her free. As Eleanor's unhinged screams faded down the marble corridor, an unearthly quiet descended upon the courtroom. The storm had passed, leaving a strange, fragile peace in its wake. Liam, his small body still trembling from the adrenaline of his testimony, broke away from Mr. Avery and ran. He didn't run to his father, who stood shattered and alone, but straight into the open arms of the woman at the defense table. Elena caught him, sinking to her knees and wrapping him in a fierce, protective embrace. She buried her face in his hair, inhaling the simple, familiar scent of him, and let out a sob that was equal parts relief, grief, and overwhelming love. All the fear, the loneliness, the public humiliation, it all washed away in this one perfect moment. He was safe. He was hers. And he had saved her. "You were so brave," she whispered into his ear, her voice thick with tears. "Mi valiente, my brave one." "I told them you didn't do it, Lena," he cried softly, clinging to her as if she were the only solid thing in the world. "I told them." From a distance, Preston watched the reunion, a fresh wave of shame washing over him. The bond between his son and this woman was a force of nature, a pure, powerful thing he had not only failed to nurture himself but had actively tried to sever at his mother's command. He had watched from the sidelines his whole life. Now finally it was time to act. When a grim-faced detective approached him, he didn't wait for the question. "I'll take you to the study," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I'll show you where it is." The scene at the Caldwell estate was a quiet invasion. Police cars lined the perfectly manicured driveway, their flashing lights a garish, unwelcome intrusion on the old money gentility. Inside, in the silent, wood-paneled study, the air was thick with the ghosts of bad decisions. Preston led the lead detective, a world-weary man named Corrigan, to the credenza by the east window. He pointed a trembling finger at the antique Swiss music box. "In there," he said. Detective Corrigan handled the box with care, his gloved hands tracing the intricate inlay before lifting the heavy lid. A tiny, tinkling melody began to play, a sweet, innocent sound that was grotesquely out of place. And there, nestled beneath the velvet housing of a faded ballerina, lay the star of Astoria. It glittered under the detective's flashlight, its cold, brilliant fire a testament to the lie that had been built around it. Corrigan said nothing, simply picking up his radio and speaking 2 words, "We have it." The truth was finally, physically, in their hands. At the station, Preston Caldwell gave his full confession. In a sterile interrogation room, under the flat, unforgiving light, the mask of the Caldwell heir crumbled completely. He detailed his mother's lifelong manipulation, the crushing weight of her expectations, and the suffocating power of the blackmail she held over him. He did not spare himself, recounting his own weakness, his moral cowardice, and his complicity in the framing of Elena. "I stood by and I let it happen," he told the detectives, his voice devoid of emotion. "She was a good person, the best person in my son's life, and I helped destroy her. There's no excuse for what I did, only a reason." It wasn't a plea for sympathy but a statement of fact. He was a broken man finally taking ownership of the pieces. The discovery of the necklace, combined with Preston's confession, was the spark that lit the media bonfire. The reversal was instantaneous and savage. The same machine that had condemned Elena now turned on its creators with a glee reserved for the public downfall of the powerful. The headlines were a brutal mirror image of the ones that had ruined Elena's life. The New York Post cover screamed, "Liar, liar, mansion on fire." Another depicted a photo of Eleanor with devil horns under the title The Greenwich Witch. The 24-hour news cycle went into a frenzy. Cable news anchors who had decried Elena's moral failings now hosted panels of psychologists to dissect Eleanor's malignant narcissism and Preston's pathological weakness. The public, eager for a new villain, devoured every sordid detail. #Justice for Elena exploded across the globe. GoFundMe pages set up to help the hero Maid crashed from the traffic. Elena Garcia was no longer a criminal. She was a folk hero, a symbol of resilience against the corrupt and powerful. The final act of the legal drama was swift and decisive. 2 days later, Elena stood before Judge Harrington once more. The courtroom was packed, but this time the faces looked at her with awe and respect. Liam sat in the front row between Mr. Avery and a deeply humbled Arthur Finch. "Ms. Garcia," the judge began, his voice resonating with a rare personal warmth. "In light of the overwhelming evidence, including the recovery of the stolen item and the full confession of Preston Caldwell, the state has dropped all charges against you." He looked at her directly, his expression one of profound regret. "Our justice system is not perfect. It is operated by imperfect people who can be deceived by power and influence. On behalf of the court and of the state of Connecticut, I offer you my deepest, most sincere apology for the ordeal you have been forced to endure." He slammed his gavel down, not with anger, but with a resounding finality. This case is dismissed with prejudice. It was over. Tears streamed down Elena's face as a wave of applause and cheers erupted in the courtroom. She was free. Her name was clear. She walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, crisp afternoon, holding Liam's hand tightly in hers. A crowd of supporters and news cameras awaited them, but this time the flashes felt different. They weren't a volley of accusations, but a beacon of vindication. She didn't stop to speak to the reporters. She simply held her head high, squeezed her little boy's hand, and walked past the wreckage of the fallen Caldwell Empire, into the first day of her new life. A month later, the autumn leaves were turning in a small, quiet park far from the imposing gates of Greenwich. The air was crisp, and the sound of children's laughter replaced the din of camera shutters and shouting reporters. Elena pushed Liam on a swing, a simple, joyful act that felt like a miracle. The rhythm was easy and peaceful. Push, soar, return. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she was no longer looking over her shoulder. They had a small, sunlit apartment now, paid for by the flood of donations from strangers who had been moved by her story. It was a place where the doors didn't need to be silent and the floors were meant for playing on. Liam's laughter as he soared towards the sky was the only currency that mattered. They were healing. The nightmares were fading, replaced by a shared future they could build on their own terms. The Caldwell name was a ghost, a story on the news about a crumbling empire, as Eleanor faced a battery of federal charges and the family fortune was slowly dismantled by lawsuits and public disgrace. It was in this peaceful new world that the past reappeared, not as a threat, but as a quiet, tentative question. Preston Caldwell approached them, looking hesitant and out of place among the laughing families. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a bespoke suit, but a simple sweater and slacks. He looked older, tired, and profoundly humbled. He didn't come with lawyers or excuses. He came alone. Liam stopped swinging, his joy dimming slightly at the sight of his father. Elena instinctively put a protective hand on his shoulder, her posture tensing. "Elena." "Liam," Preston said, his voice quiet, stripped of its former authority. He kept a respectful distance. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. That's not why I'm here. Forgiveness is something a person has to earn over a lifetime, and I am only just beginning." He knelt, bringing himself down to his son's level. "Liam," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did, that was the bravest thing I have ever seen. You were a better man than I was. I am so sorry that I put you in a position where you had to be." Liam just watched him, his expression unreadable. Preston then turned his attention to Elena. "What my mother did to you and what I allowed to happen was an abuse of power. An abuse of trust. An apology is meaningless without action. I've sold the Star of Astoria, along with my mother's other collections." He slid a thick portfolio onto the park bench. "I've liquidated the assets to create a new foundation. Its sole purpose will be to provide elite legal defense, free of charge, to working-class people who have been falsely accused by the wealthy and influential. It will have the resources to fight families like mine." Elena stared at him, stunned into silence. "A foundation needs a leader," Preston continued, his gaze direct and filled with a desperate sincerity. "It needs someone who understands the mission not as a concept, but as a reality they have lived. It needs someone with unshakable integrity, compassion, and a spine of steel. It needs you, Elena." He slid the portfolio closer. The cover read, "The Garcia Foundation for Justice." "I want you to be its executive director," he said. "You would have full autonomy. You would build the board. You would choose the cases. You would have a generous salary and the resources to make a real, lasting difference. To ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Elena was speechless. The idea was audacious, almost unthinkable. To take the name that his family had tried to destroy and turn it into a beacon of hope. Her first instinct was to refuse, to cut this final tie to the world that had caused her so much pain. But then she looked down at Liam, at his small hand that had slipped into hers. She thought of all the other Elinas in the world, the ones without a brave little boy to speak for them, the ones whose truth was silenced by money and power. Her experience had been a nightmare, but it had also given her a rare and powerful weapon: understanding. She could spend her life looking backwards, or she could use her pain to build a better future. The choice was clear. "We'll need a lead investigator," she said, her voice steady and firm, testing her newfound power. "Someone who isn't afraid of powerful families." A small, sad smile touched Preston's lips. "Mr. Avery has already accepted the position, pending your approval." Elena took a deep breath, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs. "All right, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "I accept." The final scene is not in a park or a courtroom. It's months later in a bright, modern office high above the city. The glass walls offer a panoramic view of a world of possibilities. Elena stands in the middle of the room, not in a maid's uniform but in a sharp, elegant business suit. She is speaking on the phone, her voice filled with a calm, confident authority as she discusses the details of a new case. Liam is there, sitting at a small table in the corner, happily drawing. He is home. He looks up and smiles as she finishes her call. She walks over to him and they stand together at the vast window, looking out at the sprawling city below. She is no longer a servant in a gilded cage, but a leader, a protector, a woman of power in her own right. She had endured the fire and emerged not burned but forged. Beside her, the son of her heart looked towards the future, secure in the arms of the woman who had always been and would always be his true home. Elena turned her pain into power, proving that the best revenge against a toxic system is building a better one. Our channel is dedicated to stories like this, where the manipulators and the bullies get exactly what's coming to them. If you believe in that mission, make sure you're subscribed to the family. Trolls and haters are not welcome here. Click the video on your screen right now to watch another villain get a taste of their own medicine. You won't regret it.